Good morning. I'm Penny Beauchamp, I'm the Executive Director of Mental Health America of Greater Dallas. I'm so happy to welcome you here today. I want to say thank you to some of our board members who are here. We have Alex Martin, our board chair, right here in the front. We have Sylvia Lopez, Dr. Lopez, on our board. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your support. The way we usually, if you've been to a COMI before, you know, we start the day with going around the room and introducing yourself. We find a lot of value in networking from this group. So you'll hear about what others of their field of work is. You'll learn, you might realize I need to talk to them afterwards. Feel free to stay afterwards and share business cards. And also when you QR code on the table, when you register for that, Holly will share with you the other addresses, so your emails. She'll send it out, and I think Holly, do you also send out the video or just
the video and then the presentation?
Okay.
And then everyone's contact information.
Okay, so that'll come out afterwards. We also put the recording on our website after the event, so you can follow up or direct someone there when you hear fabulous information that you think someone would find interesting and important in their work. So let's get started with just introductions, and then I'll introduce our speakers. So Sylvia, would you like to begin?
Yes, again, I'm Sylvia Lopez, and I'm here representing the United States School Counselors Association. And we have over 3,000 Texas school counselors that we represent, and also set up the board as well.
I'm Holly, I'm with Mental Health America Dallas. I'm the outreach coordinator. I'm with Mental Health America, and I'm the Mother's Day.
I'm Eran, I'm the Regional Director of Foster Care Adoption with Dr. Eran.
I'm Gabby Reed, I'm the Director of the Marketing Wellness Center at St. Mark's School Business.
I'm Julie Petrisky, I'm the Director of Academic Success at St. Mark's School, Texas.
My name is Sophia Lopez, and I work with Urban ISD as the Director of Grayson Services.
I'm Warren Bose, and I'm the Director of Intervention Services for Richardson ASD.
I'm Anthony Vasquez, and I'm with Texas House and the Stock Program, Clarity,
I'm Greg Thomas, and I am LPC with the Center for Integrated Counseling Psychology.
I'm Ann Beckman. I was a 30-year educator before I retired and came on with Mental Health America as their new program for children in schools. We Help Ourselves program for kids and many of them.
And Pam.
Good morning. My name is Pam Mickens. I am with Parkland Health and also St. Louis Community United Methodist Church Mental Health Clinics.
Julia.
I'm Julia Schneider. I'm the Community Strategist for Mental Health America, and we also have our support group. We have the recovery one, the anxiety one, we have the heart-based one, the PTSD one, and I also provide intervention services.
Yeah.
I'm Katie. I am an HMA community outreach coordinator. So if there are any questions, just reach out. I can use my phone. I'm Amy Jackson. I'm representing Dr. Leticia Colasso and Menendez Center for Community.
Welcome everyone. Some new faces. I know we've met some of you over the time, or I may have, forgive me if I haven't introduced myself. So we're so happy you're here. Let's get started with our speaker. We have Eran Grayson today. He is an educational therapist and the founder of the Grayson Executive Learning Center. It is the largest academic and ADHD coaching facility or practice in the state of Texas. Eran was a special education classroom teacher for 14 years. And he has been in private practice for 15 years. So I think he has some wonderful information to share with us, and I will turn it over to Eran.
All right. So let me ask all of you a question. Raise your hand. Ever woken up in the morning and you didn't want to get out of bed? You didn't want to get your kids up and take them to school, and you didn't want to go to work. All you wanted was to pull those covers back over your head and be left alone. Be honest, raise your hand if that's ever been your hand. Okay. Now raise your hand if in spite of feeling that way, you still got up, took your kids to school, you went to work, and you did what you were supposed to do. Raise your hand if you have that. All right, great. So there's an important lesson to be learned here. And that is that we regularly have to exercise our ability to exercise self-control throughout the day in order to do things we don't want to do, but that we need to do. And in the mental health space, the technical term to describe one's ability to exercise self-control is called self-regulation. And as the name suggests, self-regulation refers to an individual's ability to regulate themselves. And it is precisely for self-regulation or difficulties with self-regulation that form the crux of the challenges that individuals with ADHD struggle with every single day. But let's take a step back and let's ask the question, what is ADHD? Now, if I was to ask this question to a random group of people, I'd probably get a variety of different answers. But some of those answers would cluster around the idea that ADHD has a negative impact on attention. It may result in distractibility, and there might be some hyperactivity. And that would be a fair response. After all, embedded in the name ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, are the words attention and hyperactivity. However, ADHD is much, much more than just a disorder of inattention and hyperactivity. Now, I'm going to spare you the formal definition for ADHD because I feel it is confusing and not particularly helpful, and instead I'll provide you with a definition that is more helpful. And that is that ADHD is a mental health disorder that is rooted in poor self-regulation and executive function deficits. Now let's unpack this just a little bit. I already described what self-regulation is. It describes a person's ability to exercise self-control. So from this definition, we can already tell that individuals with ADHD are going to struggle with exercising self-control, at least to some degree, potentially a significant. But what are executive function? So executive function are cognitive processes. That means these are processes that occur in the brain, and they're responsible for critical everyday function, which include the ability to make decisions, manage time and plan ahead, focus and pay attention, control our impulses, and to start working on tasks and avoid procrastination. But here's the question that I have. If this is what it looks like to have executive function deficits, then I'm wondering what behaviors, what are some things we could observe in students that have or demonstrate poor self-regulation and executive function deficits? What would we observe? So what we would observe in the classroom in a student is a student that struggles to focus and pay attention, a student who struggles to control their impulses, and a student who would struggle to get started on non-preferred tasks and may suffer from chronic procrastination. So a natural byproduct of seeing these observations would be some outcomes and results. So what would those outcomes and results be of a student who demonstrates these types of observations, both in and outside the classroom? Now, I'm going to share with you what some of those consequences or outcomes would look like, but I do want to say that not every individual or every student with ADHD will demonstrate or or show all of the consequences that I will be sharing with you, but I will say that many students with ADHD will demonstrate many of these consequences. So what would we expect to see in a student who has ADHD at the high school or college level? We would see a individual, a student, because this is both in and outside the classroom. We would see a student who would maybe demonstrate poor self-care, such as not showering regularly, not brushing their teeth regularly, not engaging in other forms of self-care consistently, like sleep hygiene. We would expect to see a student who has missing or late assignments. This would likely be a byproduct of avoidance and procrastination. We would expect to see a student who would earn poor grades on tests. Now, we'll say this one you can see across the board. Some students who would perform poorly on tests, but we also have students who have ADHD that ace tests regularly without even studying. But for many, many students, we would expect to see poor grades on tests, and this would be a byproduct of avoidance and procrastination, largely from not wanting to engage in non-preferred subjects. We would expect to see academic underachievement, and not just because of the missing assignments and the poor grades on tests. We would also expect to see academic underachievement as a whole, largely due to the gaps in knowledge from the distractibility. We would likely see forgetfulness and losing things. A student who, or an individual young adult or late adolescent that does not complete their chores, again, likely due to avoidance and procrastination. We would see a student who may engage in risky behavior. This would be a byproduct of poor impulse control. And then there's a likelihood that we would see a student who has a co-occurring disorder, such as depression or anxiety, or for the most part, depression or anxiety could be something else like OCD or another mental health disorder. And that is because more than roughly 50% of individuals who are diagnosed with ADHD have a co-occurring disorder. So today, I'm very excited to speak with you because I'm going to share with you tools and strategies that you can implement if you're a clinician in your own practice. But if you're not a clinician, you just simply work with students, you can implement some of the tools and strategies or the knowledge that I'll be sharing with you in your work with students. No educational therapist required. So the first thing I want to share with you today are tools and strategies that can reduce distractions and procrastination, which is one of the hallmarks of this condition. I want to discuss what clinicians can do to address the social and emotional challenges associated with ADHD, but specifically in the academic setting. I'm not talking about addressing social emotional challenges in general or to address mood. And then I'm going to share with you how clinicians can effectively collaborate with allied professionals to improve overall patient outcomes. So the first strategy I wish to share with you is called a phone safe. I brought one with me. So this is a phone safe. This is one of the more successful tools that we use in the practice. This is designed to prevent procrastination and distractions in students and from their phone becoming a source of avoidance. Now, $25 device you can get on Amazon. I can't think of money better spent than on something like this. The way this works is the student puts their phone in this device, they close it, there's a timer with a locking mechanism on this, and the student is able to restrict access to their phone for anywhere from as short as a minute up to multiple hours. Now, some students, when they initially hear about this thing, they will complain that they might not be able to respond to emergency phone calls or to be able to see an important text message should one arrive. Well, as you can see, there are cutouts in the lid and up on the bottom to be able to charge your phone. These cutouts are small enough that it is really inconvenient to actually use the phone, which is the purpose. But these cutouts allow students to be able to answer emergency phone calls or make emergency phone calls. The idea is this, so I mean, again, it's really easy to use the phone while it is in this device, but it's psychologically, it has a very powerful effect that the student perceives that their phone is actually inaccessible to them while it's here, and it just becomes a non-issue and allows them to focus on the task at hand. I can't speak highly enough about this device. We use this quite a lot in the practice. The next strategy I wish to share with you is to avoid doing schoolwork in one's bedroom. Now, we all have associations with our bedroom. Adults do and adolescents do, but for adolescents and young adults, it's a little bit different. So our bedrooms are oftentimes a place, a sanctuary for ourselves. Our bed is there. So we have a sense and association of rest and relaxation. For adolescents and young adults, the bedroom is also a place where they feel that they can just get away from everyone and be left alone. So there's, again, this whole idea of rest, relaxation, is a sanctuary. The students, the technology's there, be it game consoles, computer, musical instruments. So it's understood that there's a lot of distractions there, but there's also these cognitive associations with rest and relaxation. None of these are particularly conducive to engaging challenging work around non-preferred tasks like doing schoolwork. So doing schoolwork in the bedroom creates friction points that don't necessarily need to exist and don't exist when the student does their schoolwork away from their bedroom. So for college students, I advocate to just avoid doing schoolwork in where you live altogether. Ideally, go to a quiet place. This could be a study room if they live in a dorm building. Oftentimes dorm buildings have designated study rooms, or going to the library. But I understand sometimes students don't want to go to the library, but just about anywhere other than where you live is better than doing schoolwork in your bedroom. For high school students who might not have the flexibility to get in a car and go to the library, I recommend creating a designated study area in the home. Ideally, this would be a space that is somewhat free of distractions and extraneous noise. And what ends up happening is the student develops association with that study space, as this is where what I do when I'm here. I do schoolwork, which actually lowers the threshold for being able to get started. And the last strategy I want to talk about is establishing predetermined start times to doing schoolwork. By the way, there are a lot more than just 3 tools and strategies for helping students overcome procrastination, but these are just some of my favorites. So establishing predetermined start times to do schoolwork. Why would we even do that? Well, the ADHD brain engages in this hardwired response when it comes time to doing non-preferred tasks. And this hardwired response or pattern says this: I don't feel like doing this right now. I'm going to do it later. I'll do it, but I'll do it later. And this hardwired response is so powerful that no amount of motivation, self-discipline, or willpower can overcome it once the pattern starts. So how do we deal with something like this? The way we deal with it is preventing this pattern from occurring in this first place. We try to short circuit it, because once it starts, there's no way to overcome it. So how do we do that? Well, we have the students set predetermined start times for when they will do schoolwork. We have them set alarms for that time. And when that alarm goes off, that prompts the student to grab their books and go to their designated school, their schoolwork area, or where they do their schoolwork. The way we use it in the practice is we will ask the student, okay, Johnny, what time are you willing to start doing schoolwork today? What time are you willing to start doing schoolwork tomorrow? And then ask the student to set an alarm for those times in order to get started doing their schoolwork. And again, we also, and when done correctly, such as priming the student look, when the alarm goes off, don't check in with yourself to see whether or not you feel like doing the task at hand. Just simply go get your books and take action. All right, let's talk about what clinicians can do to address the social and emotional challenges associated with ADHD, particularly as it relates to academics, not mood in general. So the first thing to recognize is that students with ADHD do not form a homogeneous group. You have a whole spectrum of academic performance capabilities. On one side of the spectrum, we have the student who began to experience academic underperformance the moment they step into the K through 12 educational system. This would most likely be the student who also has a co-occurring diagnosis of a learning disability such as dyslexia. So this student immediately begins to experience academic underachievement. On the complete other side of the spectrum, we have the student who has maybe been identified as twice exceptional or gifted, and this student has earned possibly straight A's throughout elementary, middle, and high school, oftentimes in AP classes. And this student will only begin to experience academic underachievement once they get to college. And the supports that this student received from their parents or from the school, once that support is gone and the student is left to fend for themselves, that's often when they first start to experience academic underachievement. However, a common thread amongst all students, say all students, but most students with ADHD is as follows. When they experience setbacks or an underperformance, they have a tendency to label themselves as, or to process the setback as some kind of a moral failing or a personal inadequacy, as opposed to asking the question, is this setback a function of maybe poor strategy or poor execution? So what we want to do is help students challenge some of their beliefs and avoid this self-blaming so they could focus on taking action that actually would lead them towards getting results. So how do we go about doing that? The first thing we want to do is use a CBT approach to increase metacognitive awareness of thoughts and actions. So by a CBT approach, I'm referring to asking probing questions. We don't want to tell the student perhaps that their procrastination is resulting in unwanted outcomes. We want to ask the student probing questions that will reveal to the student organically what the source of their challenges are. And ideally, we want to help these students or this population make explicit connections between actions and consequences, as well as inactions and consequences. And the reason we wish to make these explicit connections for the student through asking these probing questions is because in general, this population tends to do a poor job of self-monitoring and reflection, which again is why when they experience underperformance, they have this tendency to blame themselves as opposed to explore, is this maybe a function of poor strategy or execution? The goal with asking these probing questions is to translate that increased awareness that into action that leads to quick wins. So for example, let's say I'm working with a student, and as a result of asking them probing questions around what led to a poor result on a math quiz or a math test, and the student has arrived at the conclusion that procrastination and avoidance, when they knew that they were not prepared, led to this outcome. Again, I didn't tell this to the student. The answers to the questions I asked, which those answers came from the student, revealed to the student this truth. So what I would do, an example of how I would convert this awareness into action might be, I might say to Johnny, Johnny, so it appears that perhaps that procrastination and avoidance led to this result. Let me ask you, are you open to doing practice problems in math, 10 minutes per day for just 2 days? 10 minutes per day, 2 days, is that something that you're open to doing? So what I did here are two things. One, I had asked probing questions which led Johnny to this awareness that the procrastination and avoidance led to, or contributed at least, to the poor result on the math quiz. And then I immediately helped Johnny create action around resolving this issue. But it was something that I felt confident that Johnny could actually do. That's very important. I didn't say, okay, Johnny, so are you willing to commit to studying from now on? That might be just simply too much for Johnny to do. So instead, we try to get some small, quick wins. And then we finish this process by leveraging small wins into larger wins. Let me explain to you what this could look like using this example with our student Johnny, who was underperforming on his math quiz. I might say to Johnny, look, I think it's awesome that you spent 10 minutes doing practice problems the last couple of days. Let me ask you, are you open to doing the same thing, spending 10 minutes doing practice problems in math the next 2 days, but also spending 5 minutes per day on each of those 2 days studying your Spanish vocabulary flashcards? And that is how I leveraged a small win, which was having Johnny study, into a slightly larger win. Something that I am confident Johnny could do. And then I would ask him probing questions afterwards, such as, so tell me, how hard was it to actually do these practice problems? And invariably, students will tell you it's not nearly as hard as they thought it would be. It's more of the anticipation that is anxiety provoking for them, but once they do it, they find that it's not very difficult at all. So this process, this is almost an integrated process. It starts by creating awareness, translating that awareness into action, and then leveraging those actions or small wins into larger wins. This is an entire process loop that we employ in our work with students with great success. All right, the next topic I wish to share with you or discuss is how clinicians can effectively collaborate with allied professionals to improve overall patient or student outcomes. So I will just start off by telling you, it has been my experience that there is a tremendous untapped potential when allied professionals collaborate together in support of a student. The interesting thing is allied professionals do not only have to be mental health professionals like psychiatrists, therapists, neuropsychologists, and the like. They could include other individuals such as teachers, educational therapists, executive function coaches, special education advocates, mentors. All of these could be allied professionals. However, I will say this, that one allied professional that can provide a particularly unique point or observations about a student's functioning are teachers. And that is because teachers are privy to both academic functioning as well as social emotional function. Now, I will tell you, and this is particularly true in the public school setting, that one of the main gripes that I hear from clinicians when it comes to initiating correspondence with teachers is that they don't get responses to their emails. And I will tell you, having spent almost 15 years as a special education classroom teacher, there are some valid reasons why teachers, particularly public school teachers, might be a little hesitant to engage with an outside service provider. That said, having spent as many years as I have in the classroom, I know a thing or two about having teachers respond to my correspondence. And so the way that we want to interact with teachers, at least to increase the likelihood that they'll respond to us, begins with approaching teacher communication through a collaborative lens. Now, I will tell you that I cannot think of a higher educated or better educated group of individuals that feel more talked at in 2024 than do teachers. Whether it's parents, school administrators, or politicians, everybody wants to have a say in what's happening in the classroom. So we want to be careful when we interact or initiate correspondence with teachers to not let them feel that they're being talked at or that we're immediately telling them what to do. One of the best ways to get teachers to respond to our correspondence in an effort to work with them to support one of our students is to initially ask for their input. Everybody wants to give their opinion. And so initially, I recommend asking for teachers' input, and if at all possible, position your correspondence in such a way where there's a benefit to the teacher as well as the student, not benefit to yourself. So for example, if I'm working with a student that I suspect has, if I was a therapist and I'm working with a patient who has, I suspect has behavioral problems or issues, difficulties in a teacher's classroom, what I would do when I initiate correspondence with the teacher is I would say, I'd love your input on how Johnny's doing. I would ideally like to help them improve their behavior in your class so they can be a contributing student in classroom discussions. So that immediately states a benefit to the teacher, which increases the likelihood that the teacher will want to engage with me, and then we can work together to support the student. The next thing I would encourage a clinician or an allied professional who reaches out to teachers to do is to ask for the information you need, not the information you want. Let me explain what this means. So let's say you're working with a student and your primary concern is the student's academic performance in the class. Now, you might also be interested, you might also be very interested in knowing how the student is, the social emotional functioning of the student and how they're engaging in group projects or in group settings. My suggestion is this: in your initial correspondence with the teacher, focus on what is most important to you first. So inquire about the student's academic performance. Then after you have built a relationship with the teacher and the teacher believes that you're actually there to support him or her and the student, then it becomes much, much easier to start to broach into other areas of the student's function. And the last suggestion I will make to collaborate with teachers is to make providing answers to your questions as easy as possible. So teachers are very busy. The instruction portion of being a teacher is just one aspect of the job. There are significant administrative demands to being a teacher. So if you make responding to your inquiry, easy or easier, that will increase the likelihood of actually getting the feedback that you're looking for. So I would, at least in initial correspondence, would discourage asking open-ended questions, at least multiple open-ended questions, because that could be perceived as overwhelming. What I would encourage, if it's at all possible, is to ask questions using Likert scale questions or multiple choice-based questions. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, Eran, the feedback that I need is more nuanced than that which can be captured in a multiple choice or a Likert scale type of a question. And that's fair, I can respect that. But again, it's one of those things where initially, would you like to get some feedback versus no feedback? And then once you establish a relationship with the teacher, it becomes much easier to ask for these open-ended questions around other subjects that are of interest to you. Now, as far as working with allied professionals that are not teachers, again, this is oftentimes a little bit easier to do. And that is because allied professionals are oftentimes very open and wish to work with other individuals in support of a specific student. That said, some of the same rules apply as initiating correspondence with teachers. And that is approach allied professionals through a collaborative lens by asking for their input and if it's at all possible, communicating that you might be able to support that other allied professionals treatment plan or what they're working on within your own work with the student. That will definitely go a long way towards fostering collaboration. This is important. Seek to understand what the allied professional and student are actually working on. And that is because where your service or the work that you're doing overlaps with the other allied professional, that is where there's opportunity for you and your counterpart to support one another. So let me share with you, for example, what this looks like in our practice, because we work very closely with many clinicians. So clinicians that understand our service and say, for example, have assigned therapy homework to their patient, such as maybe filling out a mood journal or addressing self-care, such as improving sleep hygiene. What these therapists will often do is they will leverage the action plans that we have in our service to further or better their own treatment plan. On the flip side, when our coaches identify either behavioral or mood changes in a student that are concerning to us, we likewise will communicate that to the clinician with the idea that perhaps, if it's possible, the clinician can then incorporate our observations into their treatment plan for the student. Now, so in the spirit of understanding what students and allied professionals are working on, let me share with you a little bit how our service is structured, and so you could better leverage what we do if we're working or sharing a student that we're working on, or if you happen to be working with another coach that employs a similar model. So Grayson Executive Learning specializes in helping high school and college students who have ADHD or executive function deficits learn to successfully manage deadlines, overcome procrastination, and just otherwise excel in school. Our service is really built on 3 pillars. The first pillar is to help students develop compensatory strategies for succeeding in school. This essentially, we teach students best practices for being a student, but largely as seen through an executive function lens. So if a student has deadlines they need to manage, they've got a project or they need to prepare for an exam, we would help them develop compensatory strategies as seen through time management, planning, organization, prioritization. But simply providing students with compensatory strategies is not enough. The second pillar of our service is we use a cognitive behavioral therapy approach to increase students' metacognitive awareness around their actions and consequences, as well as their inactions and consequences. We help students challenge a lot of their limiting beliefs and negative self-talk to identify, are these things even true? And then the last pillar is our coaches provide accountability partnership. Now, students are not accountable to their coaches. Students are accountable to themselves. Coaches simply act as accountability partners. Coaches meet with students twice per week, and each session ends with an action plan. And this is exactly where allied professionals can leverage our service to further their own treatment plans. So this is what could be exciting for clinicians when working with us. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a sample action plan. Students meet with coaches twice per week, so each student gets 2 action plans per week. The action plan contains specific tasks that the student has agreed to complete on specific days. There's a lot more to this than that, but I want to really focus on how allied professionals can use our service in support of their own treatment. So what you see on each of the days are some of the strategies that I mentioned to help students overcome procrastination, such as The student getting started doing schoolwork by a specific time, doing schoolwork outside the bedroom, using the phone safe. Then we have the specific academic tasks that the student is actually responsible for. And then at the bottom, we see fill out a mood journal. This could be the homework, the therapy homework that a therapist or a clinician maybe ask our coaches to incorporate into our action plans. And we would do so as long as the student agrees to it, because this is the student centered model. If we go a little bit deeper, students then check off as tasks as they complete them. And there's a lot more to this than that. But me being here is not talking about the service. I just want to let clinicians know how you could effectively collaborate with one example of an allied professional like myself when you understand what the student and the allied professional are actually working on. All right, with that, I have concluded my presentation. I want to thank you so much for listening to my message, and I am more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
You mentioned earlier that this occurs mainly in public school. So if we're working with kids, wouldn't that occur in any school?
So this ADHD symptoms occur, if it's ADHD, they occur across all settings, absolutely. Public, in school, at work, at home, across all settings. What I mentioned with respect to public schools was specifically, there are some headwinds when wanting to collaborate with allied professionals that are public school teachers. And again, these headwinds are largely not in the control of teachers, because I want to be clear, teachers are in general love to advocate and want to support students. And there are some extremist forces acting upon them that can impede them wanting to interact with outside service providers. So that's what I was talking about when I was mentioning public schools, not that the student symptoms only occur in schools, but not at home. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so I guess my other question then would be, have you worked through the school counselor to get what you're looking for and working through the public school counselor?
We have, absolutely. We do what we can to ultimately reach the individuals who could support us best, absolutely. But yeah, I will tell you, school officials, they're not mandated to respond to inquiries by outside service providers. And so sometimes they elect not to.
Well, and special education students have to have a signed document before an organization can talk with a school counselor or a teacher, and the parent has to sign that document.
Correct.
And that's just another hill you have to climb.
It is. And by the way, a signed release.
Yeah, release, yeah.
Would need to be signed for all to talk about any student, and you need to have the parent and you need to have the parent sign it. So that's a given. But one of the concerns, if I was to just kind of get into what some of these headwinds are, one of the concerns the teachers have with speaking with outside service providers is that they're concerned that if they make a recommendation, that it will put the district on the hook to pay for it.
Yeah.
And my understanding that really applies under IDEA. This is more for special education students, not necessarily for general education students. But teachers are not educated on exactly what the legalities are. And so to just not deal with it, they might elect to not interact with an outside service provider out of concern. If I say something, then I might put the district on the hook to pay for it.
Oh, that's true.
Yes.
Hi, my job experience is 7 years teaching first and second grade, and both in low SES setting, also Highland Park, and across the spectrum, you see the same thing in the kids. So I found that I was more comfortable and secure in speaking with that outside provider or any kind of therapist or counselor if the conversation was parent-led. And so I just know that I wouldn't be quick to move on anything unless the parent express, explicit instruction, or hey, they're gonna be emailing you, or hey, let's all three meet, or whatever. But yeah, after all those boxes are checked, obviously, with the release and the legal forms, I'm wondering if, do your plans, or do you diagnose?
We do not.
So with the current diagnosis, with your plan, would that be something that could be submitted into for the resource teachers or anything like that? I feel like, and this is the last thing I'll say, and I know it's teachers now, but I feel like teachers, when they have extra work on their plate, it's a lot more, I'd be a lot more willing to do it if I had an outside resource to kind of help with the process and the parents.
Sure. So as, the first part of your question with respect to could recommendations made by a coach, make its way into an IEP? It is possible. It is absolutely possible. It is something that would be discussed in the IEP setting, and as long as it is agreed upon both by the parents and the school, because the school has a say as well, then absolutely a recommendation could be implemented. But just because it's made by a recommendation is made does not require the school to accept the recommendation. The second part of your question is, I'm glad to hear that you perceived when an outside service provider could possibly only enhance or maybe make your life easier. I would argue that not every teacher sees it that way. And a lot of teachers could be concerned that, in fact, if I speak with this outside service provider, they will ask me to do X, Y, and Z, spend more one-on-one time with the student, or modify or accommodate my instruction, or provide notes, things that might be even in the IP or whatnot, but it might be perceived as actually more work, which is one of the reasons why some teachers choose to not work with an outside service provider. But there are definitely the teachers that see it the way that you do, which is, hey, here's an opportunity to receive some support.
It's also great to hold that kid accountable. I mean, having more people invested, it's like, oh, remember what so-and-so said, remember what Dr. so-and-so said. And it's just an easier way to kind of group that kid's attention and not be the only person responsible for their learning. And once you do that, it's like a win. Because you can say, I'm gonna call mom, or I'm gonna talk to mom, tell her how good you did, or tell her you're not whatever. But when you have another person involved, I don't know, it's just helpful, just to say.
And I just want to really make a point and say, I do not intend in any way to insinuate that teachers are not helpful. I was a classroom teacher for 15 years, almost 15 years. The vast, overwhelming majority of teachers want nothing better than improved student outcomes. There's a reason why they went into this field, and they hold on to that. But it's the extraneous forces that are acting on teachers, specifically public school teachers, private school. A lot of these extraneous pressures do not exist, and there's also additional expectations amongst private school teachers to engage with an outside service provider if a parent requests for such communication to exist. But yeah, teachers are absolutely amazing, but there are just some nuances amongst the public sector side that can present some headwinds when it comes to collaboration.
The capacity they have, they overnight, so they don't have the capacity that you might
Correct, but I will tell you, there's so much untapped potential when allied professionals work in conjunction with teachers. The feedback you get is tremendous, and you won't get it from the student if you ask. So how would you know unless you speak with the person who's working with the student? So I highly recommend, it's worth the effort to connect with allied professionals. Any other questions?
I have a comment. So these are some of the notes I took. Setting times to do specific tasks, collaborative, looking things through a collaborative lens, seek to understand, mutually beneficial. And underperformance is not a label to be approach or strategy. Ask for what you need, not what you want. My children are grown, and all of these can be applied to work and to adults, working with other adults. And that's how I perceived your presentation. It's just like, these are great ways to treat each other and work with other people, and even in your private life.
Yeah.
So thank you. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And when I am invited to schools to speak before teachers and I share with them strategies to more effectively reach their ADHD students, invariably they all tell me, Eran, all of the strategies or suggestions you put forth will benefit all of my students. They are not exclusive to just this population. Generally speaking, the interventions that are effective for students with ADHD are simply best practices. Thank you for that comment. Any other comments? Yes, please.
I only have two or three questions.
Sure.
What district are you currently involved with?
So we are not formally partnered with districts. We're a private coaching company, and so typically what happens is families reach out to us directly, and that's how we typically connect with students.
Okay. Now, last legislative session, there were a number of dollars and allocated to school districts for mental health services. Are you all benefiting, or the schools trying to engage, or even if the parents come in, or is there any way to access any of that money by the students?
It's a great, I'm just curious, are you referring to Title I funds or outside of?
Penny, would you know some of the money that came down out of the last legislative session, or someone else may know?
Yeah, I don't
And
know.
we've seen not be able to figure out where the money is, and what's going on.
Because it is a diagnosable mental illness, mental disorder, ADHD is, it is in,
And it's probably through special education funds, possibly.
yeah.
The counselors I talked to, and you would know more, or as, whatever, there's no new money. And they are suffering for help, especially on mental health. And they're not being given any money through the districts because the districts are not being given any money. But that's just what I'm hearing. And I know there's some counselors in here that can. So, and it could be the money is there and being held hostage. I'm just saying.
What I would say is this, we would love to partner with school districts. We're in it to make an impact. And that's why I created this practice, is to make an impact. So we'll collaborate happily with school districts, public school, private schools. Sure.
So, last question.
Sure.
The focus is ADHD. Now, the kids that would get involved with your services, would they diagnose? Already diagnosed with ADHD, or are they exhibiting ADHD behavior?
The students we work with?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Get involved with your.
Sure. No, they do not need to come to us with any diagnosis.
Okay.
It's not a requirement.
Okay.
Most do, but certainly not all, and it's not a requirement.
And going back to your question about the funds, many districts have used those funds to, not so much to hire additional school counselors, but to hire additional social workers or mental health, mental health professionals. So they have been used in that way. And then I'm not sure where the rest of the money is going, but the personnel is usually what eats it up.
Thank you so
Thank you
much. That
very
was
much.
awesome. Before you go today, be sure, share your business cards, scan the QR code if you have it. And we'll share information if you want to reach out to someone that's here today. And please take a bagel or two or three with you when you go. There's a lot of boxes for their lunch.
You're really
Take
good.
them back to your office. They'll love you. Thank you. We will see you. We will not meet in December. It's right before the holidays. I'm just going to read, so look for announcements for the January.